Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this special Q&A on early and developmental trauma. It is the 19th of February. Happy birthday, Bonnie. It's your birthday today. and had to put that in there. We're going to do a deep dive into answering your questions and also talking generally about what early trauma is, what developmental trauma is. I'm Irene, for those listening to this after the fact, maybe on YouTube. And I've got two guests today. So what I'll have happen is I'll have Seth and Janice just say hello. It's got a little introduction, and then we'll get into our agenda, and then we'll get into questions. So Janice, you want to say hi to everyone?
Hi, everybody. I'm Janice Castelbaum, and I am living in the lovely town of Bend, Oregon. Been here for about almost 28 years, which is hard to believe. Irene and I and Team Lyon have been associated for quite some years now, many years actually. So we're colleagues and friends, which is a delightful way to be together and kind of do this trauma healing work and have some fun, as one of our primary teachers would say at one of our trainings. We're going to dive into this trauma work and have a little bit of fun too. So I guess what I'd really like people to know is that early trauma is something that is like a wound that can be healed. So that's important for folks to know. And I grew up actually early in my life with what we would call a pretty secure relationship with my attachment figures, my mom and my dad and my family. And, you know, the arc of development is over quite many years. And so some really challenging things happened to me in my life when I was about 13 or 14, was something that might seem not that significant, but in my little body at that time and in my relational experience, it was very significant. And we moved from a robust town outside of Philly, Cherry Hill, New Jersey. In fact, Jen and I, we might have swam on the same swim team, that we talk about that a lot. And we moved to this bodunk little basic anti-Semitic racist town in the middle of Mansfield, Ohio. And I was like literally kind of blown out of the water. But at the time, nobody really paid much attention to those things. It was just something that we do and get over. But it was challenging for me. And many things continued to occur that were challenging to my sense of stability and feeling connected to myself and others. So relational wounding, which is what early developmental trauma is, and Irene will speak more to that too, can happen over that arc of development. And for me, it kind of was an insult to my development between 13 and 21. And so just to say that it doesn't only have to happen when you're 0 to 3. And the good news is that anybody can really learn to have more of a securely attached, comfortable relational experience. And I'm glad that I can fall back into my securely attached, basically comfortable relational experience to help folks explore their own experience and heal that rupture in relating to others and to the world.
Thanks, Janice. Thanks for that intro of where you are and where you came from. And yeah, we have fun in our work, don't we? It's thick. This work is thick, and you have to have fun.
Absolutely.
100%.
Yeah.
Seth, a lot of people know your story, but some might be new here. So just real quick little intro to you and your experience with the early world of your development. And then I'll head into this introduction and a little bit about myself, and then we'll get going.
Yep. So yeah, I had a very different experience. And this is the thing with early developmental trauma. It's such a wide spectrum that it can cover in terms of the things and the kinds of things that can happen. For me, it was about premature birth and then being stuck in an incubator, taken away from the family and being in an incubator for many weeks. That was just a primary attachment rupture with my mother specifically and with the whole family system. And then that shortly after that, when I was about 2, my parents got divorced. And so I was ping-ponging back and forth between their houses the rest of my childhood and young adult life. And there were other things, but those were the two sort of primary early developmental ruptures that, weren't by any standard, abusive. I mean, it's just what had to happen from the perspective of that system to save my life when I was, a preemie. But it does, nevertheless, had a huge impact on my sense of safety and belonging. And then with the parents getting divorced at such a young age, is a real instability as well, and led to all sorts of maladaptive ways of coping with that. So it's an example of how, even though, and I did suffer, outright abuse and aggression and yelling and spanking and all that stuff later on, but the early stuff really wasn't abusive. It was just bad situation that left a really strong mark. Yeah.
Thanks, Seth. So I have a nugget that a lot of my colleagues here haven't even heard. Something in my early life just popped into my awareness. Gosh, that might have been 6 months ago, Seth, you think?
Mm-hmm.
So similar to Janice, I had pretty solid attachment, secure attachment. My parents liked each other. They liked me. I never was yelled at. None of that. So I had a really safe environment. However, I just found out that when I was born, so my mother carried me obviously for 9 months, and she was deeply immersed in chemicals when I was in utero. Both my parents are veterinarians, animal veterinarians. Some of you know that, and or animal doctors. And so, you're in anesthesia, you're in bleach, you're in x-ray fluid, you're in all the harsh chemicals that you would use to clean a hospital, plus the medications, dewormer, flea powder, things that are actually very, very neurotoxic. In addition to that, my mother grew up in the Philippines. She's Filipina. And in university, they sprayed their dorms every week with DDT. And they had to close the doors and be immersed in this chemical because of malaria and bugs. Of course, at that time, nobody had any idea. And of course, my father was a farmer, so he was covered in DDT when he was on the farm. He remembers being covered with it. So little Irene got a dose of a lot of chemicals in utero. And when I was born, as soon as my mother's amniotic fluid broke and it touched her, she broke out in hives to the point where they were really concerned about her. I don't know what happened to me. I don't know where they put me, but it was chaos. My dad was screaming at the nurses to give her an antihistamine. They wouldn't until the doctor got in. So it was just a shit show, right? It was really intense. And yeah, she was covered with fluid that she was allergic to. So that's one piece. And then apparently I couldn't breastfeed. I could, but the moment I had her milk, I turned completely jaundiced. So I rejected her and she rejected me. And this little nugget just landed in my lap 6 months ago as a casual conversation, because my mother was saying how she's never been allergic to anything, and it's true. And my dad said, well, the only thing you've been allergic to is your daughter. And I just my jaw dropped and I thought, wow, how come that never got talked about? So for some of you, I've had struggles with skin issues. All that story is on my website. You can look at that. Of course, my skin is healed and very good now, but it wasn't for a long time. So my early trauma was very different and not typical. But I do know there's probably a lot of people here who did grow up on farms, right, where you're exposed to those sorts of chemicals on a daily basis, and your parents might have been. The other thing that I experienced quite early on was parents who were working crazy hours. And at one point, they actually left me in a kennel at the animal hospital and forgot me. And they went home and realized, where's Irene? Uh-oh, we left her in the dog kennel. So I laugh about it now because it is, for me, a little funny, because it's not like they were trying to abuse me. They were just working like crazy, right? Working like crazy. But if you think about a little person, maybe I started to cry. Maybe I started to get hungry and nobody was there. And part of my story over the last 5 years is moving through some intense panic and anxiety while being in enclosed spaces. It's all done now. I don't have that anymore, but it was intense. And I had no memory of any of this except for piecing together some of these things. And then you add on the birth piece that I just found, and it's like, oh, that makes sense now. So again, to say what Janice said is these things don't have to be because your parents were abusive deliberately. They happen in all sorts of ways, all sorts of situations. So I'm going to read a little blurb here that we have about what is early and developmental trauma. It's quite short, and then we'll get into really how SmartBody SmartMind, so SmartBody SmartMind, this is our 12-week curriculum, can help, because it can. So what is early developmental trauma? So relational wounds and ruptures in safety that occur during early life and during important developmental stages. Early trauma is generally thought of as in utero, so when we're in mama, to 3 years old. Developmental trauma could include teenage years as well. So that's what Janice was talking about when she moved her town when she was young. Essentially, early and developmental trauma means not getting enough of the good stuff and also sometimes getting bad stuff on top of that. So that's a nugget of a definition there. So what I'd like to do is, Seth, would you like to talk a little bit about SmartBody SmartMind and how, members engage with that material from your perspective? And then we'll just kind of keep going. We'll go to Janice, and then we'll get into the questions that are being asked. And we have a few that were also submitted via email, so we want to get to those too.
Yeah, so just real briefly before I pass it on to Janice, who's going to clarify this, but a lot of the way that SBSM can help you is in the specific practices, for sure. There's various things we call neurosensory exercises, which are ways of exploring your body, getting into the system, relating to yourself. But the primary way it's going to be effective, especially for someone with early developmental trauma, is in how you relate to the material. The pace that you find, the way in which you engage is going to have a massive amount of importance in terms of its effectiveness. And Janice, maybe you can speak a bit more to that, why that is.
Yeah, sure. I think I'll just back up a little bit and include what you and I talked about in our conversation earlier, Seth, that how we engage with the program includes recognizing that the program is so intelligently organized that the beginning practices and the beginning education is geared toward really supporting a person's awareness and literal experience of the thing that we call the ventral vagus dominance. And I really love to use the phrase that all behavior is state dependent, which is a quote from Dr. Stephen Porges, who originated the polyvagal theory. And that's just the theory of how our nervous system works, which you'll learn tons about in the program. So the part of the nervous system that supports our behavior of connection and engagement has to be on enough in order for that connection and engagement behavior to happen. So if I'm really dominated by fight, flight, or freeze, it's going to be very difficult and maybe even feel impossible for me to connect and engage with myself, with others, and with the environment. So those beginning practices, our program is based on a weekly lab and lessons, but as someone who might need to really pace him or herself slower, you might spend a whole month on the first 2 weeks of the program, and that's absolutely perfectly fine. And depending on your own history and experience, it might be what we would even suggest. So the ability to do the behaviors of connection and engagement depend on enough of that part of our nervous system to be dominant. So when enough, and it doesn't have to be like 24/7, 100%, it actually doesn't work that way. But when there's enough capacity to experience the ventral vagal dominance that supports connection and engagement, then we can actually experience the thing that we call attunement. So I could be the most loving, sensitive, kind, empathic person on the planet. I could be beaming rays of connection and loving attunement. And if my receiver isn't available for that, for whatever reason, that's just not going to really land and resonate. So this is completely normal for folks with early and developmental trauma. It's unusual, it's unfamiliar, it's odd. And really, for a lot of people, it's actually scary, because trying to connect or wanting to get connected and engaged and feel safe and sound and secure wasn't available, or maybe when I did, it went haywire. There's lots of personal reasons and experiences that folks have that would make connecting and engaging and attaching and attuning feel scary or dangerous. So the invitation is to do it a little bit at a time, to even just notice what it's like to connect or engage with a favorite plant in your house or a tree. People love to connect and engage and feel attunement with nature, with the ocean, with the sky, with an animal, a pet. Or maybe there's a person in your life, or there was a person in your life, like a grandparent or my second grade teacher, Mrs. Miller. I can still think of Mrs. Miller. I can see her hairdo. I can see her coming up to my desk, and I can feel her, like I can still feel her inside with me. Like she was so supportive and loving. So there's lots of ways to begin to build your attunement experience a little bit at a time, over time, in a variety of ways. And even considering that the program itself, like even right now, my intention is to invite you in and to let you invite me in. So the video, a practice, could be a way of you recognizing that this is offered for you in a caring and consistent and empathic, attuned way, and just even imagine letting that in. Or just noticing what it's like to kind of come into yourself. You might even at times during the practices or the videos, like look away from the screen and recognize that you're connecting with yourself through these practices and through the various teachers and through the various lessons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, it's important to highlight that. Thanks, Janice. That's great. And it's the first early stages of the program are very much about supporting this. Like, that's why Janice was saying you might spend the first few months on just the first lab, where we, talk about things like really knowing what your resources are and the basic concepts of orienting to your environment. The notion of tuning into your biological impulses,
Mhm.
that simple process of honoring your need to eat or drink or pee, right, whatever it may be, that is bringing in those elements of how can I attune to myself? How can I notice myself in these ways? And the early lessons are really focused on building a strong foundation with that. And like Janice says, if you can relate to those materials as like this practice itself is a caring other thing that I can come to and is available for me whenever I need it, right? Because that's one of the things about it being online. It's not, a slot that you have reserved once a week to go see somebody. It's there for you whenever you need it, these practices. So in that way, they very much can support that process of building trust and attachment and safety. Irene?
What I want to add, because I'm seeing some of the chat. So it's possible that some folks here are very new to what this SmartBody SmartMind thing is, this curriculum is, especially if you've just found us today or this week. And just as a general overview, and I do encourage everyone to go to the information and registration site and take some time. Like, you have till Tuesday to join, but, you know, read a little bit, look a little bit, watch some of the videos of our students a little bit, you know, just little, as we would call, titrated doses. So pace yourself in reviewing the site, because there's a lot there. And overwhelm is definitely something that we carry when we've had various traumas. You know, I'm thinking, Janice, of the time when I put this out online, and you were like, what the heck is she doing? You know, what's Irene doing? You know, because I was kind of doing stuff that wasn't really understood. And I don't know if you can speak to your experience, Janice, when you experienced the format in the way that it was put out, that has education, practices, and then of course we have support, right? So people like Janice and Jen and Seth are in there moderating and answering questions for the length of the 12 weeks and an extra 4 weeks after we finish our live session. So, you know, you are a master of the somatic world, Janice. What did you notice about the way that things were put together that was different or unique?
Well, yeah, the thing is that I thought, you can't do this shit online. And she said, well, I am. I said, okay, sign me up, you know. So I would say that one of the most unique aspects and beneficial aspects of the program is that really it's very intelligently and skillfully curated. It would be like going to a museum and seeing a retrospect of a very famous artist's work from the beginning all the way through. And so the building blocks of the program are solid. And then it builds and builds and builds. And the wonderful thing about it is that, like Seth was saying, it's very different than going into a therapist or a practitioner's office once a week or every 2 weeks, or even doing a live group. You have this material, like, it's always there for you. So you could get to the 3rd or the 4th week and realize that, you know what, I feel like I actually skipped over that resources lesson. I need to dive back into that. You have it right there to refer to and go back into. And in a way, that is the assistant caring other. It's there for you like forever, including all the upgrades to the program. So I would say that the hallmarks of the program, and since I started, you know, being a consultant and a colleague with Irene in the program as a moderator and also as a kind of a consultant, is that these 2 pillars of the education piece and concept, it's super important, and we work with our minds. So it's important for things to make sense to us. And, you know, direct experience, nothing beats it. So we could talk about feeling calm. We could talk about that till we're blue in the face, and we could explain it left and right. But if we haven't had the direct experience of being calm, so talking about being calm and actually being calm, just for an example, are 2 very different things. And the beauty of the program is that the practices and the neurosensory exercises and the organ exercises and the body layer exercises all build that direct experience, which is like direct to and with your nervous system. So that's my take on why the program, what comes with the program and why it's so useful. It's just chock full of some of the best information and practices all in one place that you have forever. And if you're interested and available and can do one-to-one work with an aligned practitioner, it doesn't have to be a SmartBody SmartMind person. It could be someone who really understands this work. That's just beautiful icing on the cake. Mm-hmm. But even the practices that we do with the intention of literally touching certain organ systems, they're incredibly strong, because intention is a very, very strong instrument that we all have access to as we learn to grow it.
Thanks,
So,
Janice.
I think, yeah.
Yeah. And I'm going to get into a question that Jen flagged in a moment here. One of the common questions we get, and I'm going to just put it out there, and then maybe Seth and Janice, you can riff off of this, and then we'll get into the chat. And I know this will come up because when I was putting this online, I was really the only one putting this online. And now we have a lot of people with other nervous system courses and programs. A very hot one is vagus retraining exercises that are very, very popular. Trauma somatic release exercises that have become very popular. And while I know those have a time and a place, what is within the curriculum of SmartBody SmartMind is really touching into the parts of the body, as Janice said, like you are literally learning how to bring touch and connection to yourself. It serves to grow capacity and what we would call regulation, so that a lot of these other things start to happen naturally. Trauma releases happen naturally. The desire to roar and scream starts to happen naturally. The tears happen a bit more naturally. And so I think that might be one of the bigger differences between what is put into the curriculum of SBSM compared to something that's just focusing on, say, retraining the vagus nerve. There's nothing wrong with getting a robust and healthy vagus nerve. And we do that in SmartBody SmartMind. We do have some toning exercises that bring sound into the picture, but they're not until about week 7 after we've laid down foundation and groundwork. So I wanted to add that in because we typically get that question. What about this program? What about that program? We can't speak confidently to all these other things because we know ours the best. Seth, do you have anything to add to that, or Janice?
Well, from an early developmental perspective, it's really significant because a lot of these things that we're seeing are ways to push on your system. They're about stimulating the system to get a response, which is actually kind of the last thing you would want to do. And if you think about a little baby, you know, that's not going to work. So a lot of us, our physiology, if we've been through early developmental trauma, portions of our physiology and our emotional body and our psyche may be stuck at that like we're still a baby inside in some ways. And trying to impose these techniques and tools that are trying to force a response in the system or stimulate the system is actually way, way too much. We much more want to support that organic building of capacity and knowledge, self-knowledge, familiarity with ourself, learning how to attune to ourself. And when we do that, there is no need to push on the system. Like Irene said, as the system senses safety, the things that need to bubble up will bubble up on their own in their own pace organically, which is what we want.
Thanks, Seth.
Yeah.
Janice, so you don't have anything else to add? I'll get into a question that Jen flagged for us, or do you want to add to that?
I'll just add one little note, which is many times, I mean, there's other programs that I actually am fond of, and I think they do great work. However, a lot of the programs and a lot of the stuff out there on YouTube and all around are just like Seth said, they're techniques. Mm-hmm. And so they can kind of end up being bundled into our management strategies rather than really creating an authentic capacity. And so the education and practices, I think, of SmartBody SmartMind are laid down in directly working with the nervous system at that level that we really need to build so that those quote unquote practices or techniques can actually be integrated and be very authentic rather than a push and something that we do. Mm-hmm. The practices of this program support us to more into a way of being rather than a doing.
Yeah.
Put a pin in that one. Authentic capacity. That's a good one, Janice. Mm-hmm. And what that reminded me of is, if again, you think about the way we would want to raise a healthy human, you're not going to push them to start walking faster. You're not going to push them to eat all their vegetables. However, how many of us were pushed to eat all of our vegetables? We're pushed to walk sooner than we were ready. We're pushed to do things that we just weren't ready for. And that's just so much part of our culture, our society. And so we're really stepping back and giving the system what it is designed for, which is that connection, security, safety, etc. All right, I'm going to get into this question from Mishi that Jen flagged. So this is about birth trauma. So my early trauma was a forceps birth. So for those that don't know what those are, that's where you have these medical instruments that are taking baby out of mom, and it's quite stressful and it's a shock to the system. You say, I have a very strong pain in my jaw and I'm slowly solving it in therapy. I'm thinking of doing SBSM. I probably became dumbfounded. And even today, I have trouble saying things and setting boundaries. Like there's always something stuck in my jaw. Are there any speech or vocal exercises for this? That's the first question. And the central issue is that I have never been in a longer relationship, but wish I had. How can this help with the program? So I'm going to tackle the relationship question, and then Janice and Seth, maybe you can speak to the specifics of speech and vocal and how that relates to SBSM. So as a generality, having done this work with many people for many years, I have witnessed SmartBody SmartMinders leave partnerships because they really had to. And I found people at age 60 have fallen in love and met their soulmate. True stories. And so again, what happens, and I even get shivers as I feel this, when you become more regulated, when you're more attuned to yourself, when you know what you need, what you want, what you like, and how you connect to the environment, you become this little beacon for more of the stuff that you know you want and you like. We could say it's alignment, it's opening up to the field of the universe. And so I have seen folks of all ages find connection and soulmate into the later years. So definitely that connects to this. The other question here, Seth, Janice, do you want to tackle that about if there's any exercises specifically for speech?
Go ahead, Seth.
Well, yes, in different ways. So, I mean, there are practices where we're working specifically with the jaw and cultivating the ability of the jaw to mobilize, to make sound. There's different things like that. But fundamentally, what I think we're talking about is authenticity. Because as you say, you feel like your words are getting stuck in your jaw. So when we don't have good attunement early on, this can be one of the things that happens. Attunement is something that is meant to reinforce our authenticity. Like our caregiver is paying attention to us, not a projection of how they think we should be, but they're attuning to us, our unique nature, and supporting that. Now, of course, there's boundaries and chores and, all sorts of things that come along with childhood. But at a fundamental nature, a good attuned parent is supporting that child's authenticity. When that doesn't happen, or even worse, when there's outright abuse like I experienced, where I'm constantly, was screamed at, and every time I tried to speak my truth was told I was ridiculous. When you have these types of situations, yeah, that speech can get locked up. So very often the key to connecting into that speech and into the ability to have your authentic truth be felt, heard, listened to, comes along with working with what we call healthy aggression, which is also highly connected to the jaw and in the sympathetic fight-flight response. And it's about connecting to that life energy of aggression in a healthy way that empowers you to allow the energy of your truth to come out. And that's something that we very much focus on many lessons. There's 2 training calls, all devoted to healthy aggression. Later on, again, this is something that's later in the program, after building foundations. So yeah, absolutely.
And I'll add a little note that's tied into it without getting too complicated, but when some kind of sort of like an insult comes toward the body has a response. Like even in utero, there's images that we have seen where if a mom has ingested something that's like dangerous or poisonous or not healthy, there's a way that the fetus moves away from that insult. So it could also be that because of a forceps birth, something literally happened around the head and the face that got stuck in the jaw. And in some of the classes that we do, some of the lessons that are offered in the program, an opportunity to really tune into the impulse of what this jaw or head might have wanted to do when that life-saving forceps experience occurred could be allowed to be noticed and naturally unfold to help release. Might be connected to healthy aggression and expression of truth. It might just be following the impulse of what it feels like in one of the neurosensory lessons my body wants to do. So I offer that to the person who's curious about what might be stuck there.
Yeah.
Thanks, Janice.
Yep.
Here's a question that Jen flagged in the comments. Can you speak? I'm going to move this so I'm looking direct on, just a sec. Can you speak to supporting a spouse who is recognizing early wounds? So can you speak to supporting a spouse who is recognizing early wounds and now is also seeing how that shifted to an unhealthy codependency in marriage and is now trying to be stable and connect in healthy ways? It feels like another wound as an adult that the primary caregiver as an adult was a spouse and trying to be secure in healthy ways. Does that make sense to you too? Seth, do you want to tackle that one?
Well, it sounds like they're saying, how can I best attune to my spouse in the way that their caregiver should have, is kind of the
Yes,
gist I get from that, how
I
to
think
best
so.
support them. And well, I mean, knowing this work will certainly help, you know, be getting educated in this work and the practices would certainly be helpful for that. Ultimately, we need to feel these things in ourselves often before we can share them with others. That being said, I would say it would be about providing some attuned touch could be very, very helpful. So that doesn't mean like a massage or anything. It means maybe just having your hand on their back or on their shoulder, just communicating a sense of I'm here, I'm with you, I'm listening. That's a lot of what attunement is about. It's about not imposing your will. It's about listening. And so that's something that you may have to develop with your own system first. It depends on each person. Sometimes we don't know how to give that to another person because we never got it. So I guess it depends on where you're at and on your journey. But attunement, listening, safe touch, that all that stuff can be very supportive for someone who's moving through that kind of layer.
The thing I'll add about, I mean, you and I obviously are in relationship, Seth, and we've moved through so many traumas and healings in the last 11 years of being together. And it can be rocky sometimes, but that doesn't mean that you're meant to end it, right? And I think when the two people, if we're thinking about a partnership, it's important, I believe, for both people to understand what this means, what this nervous system is, why, you know, so-and-so Seth needs to just be alone for a day. And it doesn't mean that he doesn't love me. It's that he needs some space. He needs some autonomy, right? Or if I'm having a little bit of a tantrum because I'm feeling those needs that weren't met when I was young, and I'm being a little bit of a, you know, prickly bitch to him, it's not because I don't like him. It's because there's something coming up. And by him just allowing this to come up, not feel threatened or any of those things, or be hurtful back to me, it allows my system to express what it never maybe was able to back in the day. Right. I'm thinking about this one day when we were walking, Seth, and for whatever reason, I had this strong desire to push. And Seth's a pretty big guy. And we were walking on the street, like in the city, and I just started bulldozing him down with my hands and roaring. And it became a fun play. Like we started playing and he's like, that's it, Irene, that's it. Push me. If my husband didn't have he would have thought I was crazy or stop doing that. We're in public, right? And so there is something quite fun and playful also when you are in a partnership and a relationship where you can make this like a cool thing, not to say that it isn't sometimes tough, but having that person who can accept, oh, this is that thing that's happening. Okay, let's be with it in the way that might need to happen.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
doing this with a partner can be really, really fun and rewarding and healing.
Yeah. There's a question I saw that
Yeah,
relates to what I was just talking about. So it was up at the top. I want to make sure we didn't miss it.
sure.
It was, I've done the 21-day program, but have little improvement with my chronic tension.
Mm.
I've joined SBSM to learn how to work with the stress organs and body spaces. What will those practices involve? So that is exactly what I was just talking about, attuned touch. That's what it's about, and attention. I don't know, Janice, do you want to elaborate on a little bit on that, on attuned touch and attention and how we bring that to the organs and diaphragms?
Attention or intention?
Attention
Attention.
or intention, either way.
Yeah, well, they go
Yeah.
together.
They go together. Yeah.
It's basically most simply that intention is the simplest way that I like to describe it is it's the thing we're inviting or wanting to happen. My intention is to feel my body settle to the table or to the floor, whatever it may be. So in order for my intention to have the opportunity to sort of take hold and do its thing, I have to notice where I'm placing my attention. So if I'm doing a practice around, say, the stress organ of the kidney adrenal area or the brainstem or the layer of fascia, if that's my intention, but my attention is what I'm going to have when this practice is over for lunch, then the intention doesn't have any pathway. So intention is something that rides on the pathway of attention. And in the practices that we do, in anybody that works as a practitioner that works remotely, and we're literally using touch online and distantly, we're working very clearly with, this is where we're going. We're going to your brainstem to invite it to notice this caring, consistent, attuned contact of support. And we just are going to really recognize these hands. And you can imagine feeling my hands at the back of your head, inviting your brainstem to notice non-demanding, friendly, attuned contact, inviting the brain to simply sort of melt down a little bit and let down a little bit. And then my attention and your attention is to noticing, oh, what might be happening here? What's happening in the rest of my body? And we're tracking, we're noticing, and we're tracking what we're noticing. So that's the connection of attention and intention for a particular practice or purpose, is how I would say it.
Great.
Thanks, Janice.
Sure.
There's a couple questions here that clump together. So I'm going to read one that Jen flagged and then one that was written to us in email. So this is from Victoria in the chat. So how do we learn to differentiate between the need to rest and being in freeze? How do we learn to differentiate between the need to rest and being in freeze? I'm going to say right off the back, practice and trial and error and listening to your body and getting to know the system. And I'll pause there and I'll get to the next part, but it really is trial and error practice. You say, I have severe chronic fatigue and I live my life in not so functional freeze. Oops, sorry, my cursor was covering that. I have severe chronic fatigue and have lived my life in not so functional freeze, but also very ill and need to rest. It's hard to separate which is which. So again, practice, trial and error. One of the things that I think is the most challenging for a lot of our students who fall into this world of living with chronic illness and this fatigue is you want to be better and you want to get moving and getting your body out into the world, but the body just won't have anything to do with it. And that comes back to what Janice was talking about earlier of being caught in this fight, flight, and freeze loop where we're essentially, we have lots of gas on and brake on at the same time. And so there's a need to start to understand, this is a freezy thing that Irene was talking about. And I know that because my brain's going a little offline. I'm feeling a bit more frozen as opposed to gurgling in my stomach, some of the signs that you might learn that you're getting into more of that real rest digest. And so one of the not one of the practices, but with the practices, we are slowly building up what we call capacity within the somatic system. And that capacity allows some of these fight, flight, freeze responses, but also more genuine regulation to be felt a little more clearly. Seth, Janice, do you want to add more to that?
I'm sorry, I was scrolling through the chat looking for the next question.
That's okay.
Listening to you in the periphery.
That's okay.
I think you covered that well. And I too was interested. I'd like to bring something in if I can that relates to what we're talking about. And some of the questions I've seen a few here about relationships with spouses, anxiousness in relationship, the thing that we call codependency, etc. And so as we're learning to heal our nervous systems, particularly around relationship, it's a dance. It's not a linear pathway. And what we learn around connecting with ourself helps build our ability to connect with another, and allows us to do this thing that we call co-regulation, which we haven't really talked much about, but it's inherent in learning to develop a healthy, flexible nervous system. So if I feel like I can only feel okay when my partner holds me tight, or when I'm anxious and my partner and I have sex, if that's the only way that I can settle, then of course that's a management strategy and what we might call a codependent or an undifferentiated sense of myself. So it's a dance around, how do I stay with myself? How do I know myself? How do I come into a little bit of settling so that the threat physiology of fight, flight, or freeze is not the dominant state? Because if I'm all worked up and I'm anxious and nervous and scared and I need to be settled, I can first of all ask myself, where am I in my nervous system? I'm in threat. And if I'm in threat, this is all I can see is threat. So just recognizing that can help me realize, okay, I'm worked up. Yes, I can do a little orienting. I can come into my heart. I can feel the weight of my body in the chair. There's many things that I have resources for to help myself settle a little. And then can I come to my partner and say, right now, what would really help me a lot would be a long hug for 30 seconds. Are you available to help me with that? Are you available to give me that? And then my partner has the choice to say, well, I might not be able to do that, but I can hold your hand. Would that be all right? And then we're playing that ping pong of back and forth of being self-regulated in a co-regulated field, and our relationship patterns of codependency and undifferentiated shift to being able to say, I'm okay, and I'm okay with you, et cetera, et cetera. So I hope that helps answer a multitude of questions in here about how do I be with my partner when I or he, she are all feeling dysregulated, et cetera.
Thanks, Janice. I'm going to answer a quick one that I saw. Someone asked, what are your views on hypnotherapy? Does that help release trauma? So this is actually top of mind because I've just been dabbling with hypnotherapy myself the last 6 weeks. And I can say, and I said this to Seth after my first session that was 3 hours long, this never should be done with someone who doesn't have strong foundation and some form of secure capacity to be in intense thought and intensity in the feelings of the body. It is more advanced practice, in my opinion, as is some forms of meditation, things like EMDR, which I'm surprised we haven't had that question yet, because a lot of people ask that for early trauma. From what we've seen, it's not the best when the system doesn't have a lot of capacity to sense and to know when to stop and to go. So I do think hypnotherapy is amazing. I've seen great benefits, and I've also had a lot of groundwork And I wouldn't really suggest it if one hasn't done some solid groundwork and capacity building first. So I wanted to answer that one. I want to get to a question that was submitted by email, guys, and then of course keep seeing what is coming up in the chat. So this is from Corinna. There's a few questions here, but I'm going to get to one first, and then we'll see if we have time for the others. So I heard developmental trauma can lead to stiff fascia. So fascia, for those that don't know, is this sheath of tissue that wraps around our muscles. It's kind of everywhere in our body. It's very intelligent tissue as well. This is because of the emotions stored there. And will this work with the fascia to help loosen it? 100%. There is a specific lesson in SmartBody SmartMind called the layers. The layers, for those alum, this is new. It's only been around for about a year. But I guide you through working with the skin, the fascia, the muscle, the bone. All of these tissues are impacted when we are under some form of shock, stress, trauma, or stored traumatic experience. I liken it to one of my favorite analogies. It's a simple one. If you've ever been in a plane, right, and it's a plane that is pressurized because you're going into high altitude, you can feel when they put the pressure on, because your water bottle starts to, get smaller, and your ink pen in your bag explodes and all these things, and you're having to clear your ears. So when it comes to various traumas, and many of them developmental, but even shock traumas, it's not just going to hit your little finger, right, or your big toe. It's your whole system that is impacted by these activating stress responses. And so fascia, when tight and stiff and not glidey, it's meant to be very glidey and loose. It can cause a lot of pain. A lot of the muscular pain we have, yes, it's the muscle, but it's also the wrapping around that muscle. If you've had bone breaks or anything like that, bone, while healed, can still store a shock in it. We call this force vectors. What was the other thing I wanted to mention with this? Came out of my brain. Seth or Janice, do you want to add any more about working with the tissues? Oh, I know what I was going to say. I mentioned this the other day in a chat that Seth and I did, but one of our mentors, elders, he passed away about 2 years ago, Robert Scayer. He writes in his book, The Trauma Spectrum, that he believes that fibromyalgia, chronic illness, chronic pain, a lot of autoimmune disorders are a result of pre-verbal trauma and the system being stuck in a cycling loop of sympathetic fight, flight, and freeze, and it's impacting the tissues into basically chaos. So there's this opening and closing, dilation, constriction, and the system isn't in a nice flow. It's not in a nice flow. And that's why many who have these early traumatic experiences, developmental trauma, eventually have, say, migraine headaches or gut problems, troubles with circulation, always cold or always sweating. It's the autonomic system being in this dysregulated state. And that can impact the tissues and cause a lot of chronic pain, because blood flow and nutrients aren't coming into the tissues and waste products aren't leaving. So this dips in quite deep to all tissues of our body.
There's one piece I just wanted to add about the fascia specifically as it relates to early trauma and developmental trauma, because this was my experience, and I've worked with many clients who had the same thing. It seems quite common where there'll be a pattern of what we call bracing across the abdomen, also sometimes the chest, and very often that bracing is in the fascia. If you think about an infant who's experiencing a fight-flight charge, they have nothing to fight or flee with. Right? Their limbs they can move, but they can't run, they can't fight. What they can do is brace their abdomen. And that can set up a pattern of bracing. It can be in the musculature, but it can also be in the fascia. Also, another thing is if when you were a kid and you walk into a room, this was true in my household lots of the time, where there's tension and no one's saying anything. There's the big old elephant in the room that no one's talking about. When kid walks into a room like that, what happens? The stomach often is like, ugh. right? It just feels, oh, you feel sick to the stomach, there's butterflies. That again, I believe, is the fascia picking up on the environment and constricting. Over time, that fascia may be like, you know what? I'm just gonna stay on lockdown because it is way too hard to feel all this stuff. And when that happens, that can lead to numbness, lack of interoception. Like me, I would stuff myself because it was the only way to feel sensation there because of all the bracing. So it can be many ramifications that occur from these kinds of things in the fascia. Oh, you're muted there, Irene. Irene, you're muted.
We can't hear you.
Oopsies. We're at the top of the hour. I'm okay to go a little longer. How are you two for time?
I'm okay. And
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. We have to, Seth and I need to jet 30 past the hour, but I'm good. I've got energy and I know people are interested in this topic. So we'll go a little longer. I have a question here that Jen flagged. What can I do against complex PTSD? And I also have MS, so I'm assuming multiple sclerosis, and I might also be autistic. I did cognitive behavioral therapy and I do EMDR and they did not help. So yes, it's quite possible that CBT and EMDR were not exactly what your system needed. Again, this comes back to the importance of asking the question, why is the complex PTSD there and why is MS there? We've seen through a lot of the research, specifically the ACE study, Adverse Childhood Experiences study, that when there is early adversity, early traumas, there's dysregulation within your system, and then we get older, we become adults, we mature. It's very strongly linked to these illnesses, neurodegenerative illnesses like MS, ALS, autoimmune, certain cancers, and of course, complex PTSD. And so CBT, which is therapy, and there's nothing wrong with a really good cognitive therapy session in the right time and place, but it's only getting into typically the thoughts, the mind, the cognition. And this complex post-traumatic stress is in the cells. It is in the dysregulation of the nervous system. EMDR, which is a form of work that involves the eyes, and I am not experienced in it. I've experienced a little bit of it in session. From my experience and what colleagues have said, it is not suited for early trauma healing. It is too stimulating, and often a person will override what they're sensing inside, and it's kind of like you're skating over the dysregulation as opposed to dropping in and working with the capacity building of the body, which is what we need. We need to get back into those early connections, connecting with self, connecting with the environment, learning how to self-regulate. So this makes sense that these methodologies did not help. And it's a common story we hear over and over again from our students. I tried all these things, and it wasn't the thing that got to the root of this dysregulation. Anything to add, my lovely colleagues?
Well, I'll add that as you were just describing that, you went like this. So those practices and those approaches can be super useful, but they're referred to as top down. And I'd say nine out of 10 people who come into my office or reach out to me to work together will say, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this. It hasn't worked. And we share about the nervous system. We learn about how your nervous system works and how you map it. And they go, oh, that's the missing piece. And this was one of Irene's statements many years ago in developing and sharing this program. It's like, this is foundational bottom up piece that's missing for, I would say 10 out of 10 people, because that's how folks are making it into my practice or into this program, because they've tried so many things for chronic PTSD, complex, all sorts of things, all the issues, the health issues. And it's because that foundational bottom-up piece of working literally with the function of the nervous system has been missing. And so I just wanted to add that part in, that it's referred to, known in the literature and all the work on trauma as a bottom up,
Mhm.
because the biology is leading the show, and we are all conditioned to sort of, in a way, until we learn about it, we've developed this whole collection of management strategies in order to get through life. And it's exhausting. And that's why the chronic fatigue and the MS and many of the other health issues may be showing up, because as Gabor Mate is known by his book, when the body says no, it's just like, I can't do it anymore. I can't keep the gas pedal and the emergency brake on at the same time. It's too much. So the system says, we're just going to unplug. And that's not a way to live our lives. So
Yeah.
bottom up is a really important piece that we address right from the beginning.
Yeah.
Thanks, Janice. What I'm going to add to that, again, just for those who are really new here, who are, they're hearing this information for the first time. I want to make a bridge in that our autonomic nervous system, which governs the fight, flight, and freeze. So what Janice was just talking about, it's been on, e-brake and gas pedal for our whole lives. That autonomic nervous system also is what is in charge for keeping our gut healthy, our hormones healthy, our cardiovascular system, our bladder, our liver, our reproductive organs, our ability to connect to people and to the world around us. It allows us to cognitively think, like it governs everything. And so when the system is so interested in keeping the stress response on, and it's like we need to stay on guard and be in fight, flight, freeze, it forgets that it has to keep the digestion healthy. It forgets that the immune system needs to be enhanced, that cells need to be repaired, that hair has to grow, right? That nails want to grow. All these cellular systems and regeneration systems, that nerve cells need to be kept up, right? This is where cancer comes from. This is why certain types of cancer are connected to early trauma. The system is not getting rid of the bad stuff, and it's not building up more of the good stuff. So when nerves aren't getting that proper nutrition and electrical signal, they're not going to regenerate. They're going to start to kind of tatter. If you think about electrical sockets and old electrical sockets that you've had forever, like those can be very dangerous. Right? You want to make sure that they're robust and healthy, and the system is the same way. So I wanted to make sure people are getting this connection with chronic illness, internal body troubles, and the nervous system being always in this state of fight, flight, freeze.
Mm-hmm. There's one in the pre-submitted questions we haven't answered, which I'd love to get to.
Please, Seth, thank you.
So this is one asking about, can you do this work if you're still in relationship with people who are abusive? In this case, it's someone who left the family home because of an abusive, controlling dynamic with a mother, but still wants contact with the father. But being in contact with the father means she gets in contact with the mother and gets all these triggering and controlling dynamics. So the short answer is yes, you can, but you may need a break. So when we're doing this work, especially if the trauma that we have originated in a toxic family system, and those toxic dynamics are still happening in our adult life, it may mean that you need a period of boundaries where you're not subjecting your system to that stimulus. Now, it's good that you want to keep the connection with your dad. And my hunch is, being a dad myself, he would probably be okay with you saying, look, I love you and I want to be in connection with you, but I need like some time to not be triggered by mom. And I'm just going to not communicate and come around for a while because I want to heal myself and I need this sort of container. And to view it that way, it's like you don't have to cut off all contact forever. It's like, I want to create a safe container for myself, which again comes back to these foundational principles of attunement, safety, connection. Oftentimes that has to start with ourself and honoring our connection with ourself and removing some of those big stimuli, at least for a while.
Yeah, and I'll I had a client like this too, so I'll add just a little note, like when it's all, to keep this in mind for sure, what Seth is offering, very important. And it may also be possible that, especially when the person who wants to stay engaged with dad is more in a regulated, safe and connected and engaged state, may be able to have a little bit more bandwidth for a creative strategy. Like maybe there can be a conversation with dad where dad can ensure there's privacy. Maybe it's when he's at the coffee shop or he's at work, or it's a text message, or there's maybe some other way that separation for space to give the person who's trying to build herself or himself a healthy experience has that, but also has a thread of connection that is agreed upon and identified as not triggering to that toxic dynamic that the person was talking about.
Great point. And
Often,
also, yeah, exactly. You could be both. Absolutely. And also to know that as you get regulated and more healthy, you will develop the capacity such that the stuff coming from your mom, it won't have maybe such a big impact as it's having now.
100%. I'm going to read a question here and answer this because this has come up a couple times this week and I haven't gotten to it. So this is from Catherine. She asks, what if the autonomic nervous system is being activated by external and internal factors such as EMFs or infections? Can SBSM work in spite of being in a constantly overactivated state? So yes. So EMFs, I prefer to say non-native electromagnetic frequencies because the sun emits healthy EMFs and electromagnetic frequencies. So Wi-Fi, electricity, all the things that we have in our modern industrial world. I am someone who's very sensitive to this stuff as a result of my stuff growing up. However, when we have more regulation on board, we are better able to, I don't want to say cope, but have those things around us and not have them impact us to the same degree. Now, do you want to live under a power plant? No.
No.
Right? We have to have context here. There are certain exposures where if we are submitted to those over and over again, we know through research it causes cancers and defects and that kind of thing. You know, no amount of regulation in the world would have kept those who were in the Chernobyl disaster free from problems. But let's just say it's something that we can mitigate. You know, this is where, yeah, probably don't want to be connected to your Wi-Fi device 24/7. I don't recommend that. Probably want to turn off the Wi-Fi when you're sleeping. A lot of people find that helps. But when you have more regulation, we can kind of adapt a bit better with these, and we're more likely to do self-care practices like getting outside, getting into nature, which helps to mitigate and recharge our electrical batteries so these non-native EMFs aren't impacting us. In terms of infections, yes, I mean, I just got a bit of a cold and a throat thing the last week. Did I feel perfect? No. Was I able to still think clearly and show up every day and adapt as necessary? Yes. Some of you saw I wasn't able to talk very well last week and now it's back. So our ability to bounce back, these things are always going to be around us, right? But the more robust, the more regulated we are, we will also be like, I think I'm feeling a little tired, more tired today. I better follow my impulse and actually cancel that dinner date. I think I'm going to not do all the things I was supposed to do because I'm feeling a little more burnt out and worn down. How many here feel those things and we ignore them, and then the next day we're flat on our back sick, right? So there's also something to be said about having more attunement to ourselves, and then that allows us to do better self-care, which in the end just keeps us well and better overall, right? So we want to be sensitive to things that are toxic, like poisons, right? We want to be sensitive to these things so that we're not in them all the time. So I wanted to really get to that one because it's a reality of living in the Western world.
I appreciate you bringing that forward, and it brings forward the word we haven't quite used, which is resilience. As Irene said, it's the capacity to bounce back and to come back into equilibrium, which is super important, whether it's around our physical health, our emotional reactions, things like that. Like when I get a little thrown off, whether it's a cold or, man, my fibromyalgia just took me down. As we build regulation and capacity, the thing that we call resilience, how I come back into a functional, organically healthy window, builds as well. And that's what helps us be able to relate to these things that are conditions of life.
100%. Do you have anything to add to that, Seth? And is there any other chat questions that we haven't gotten to that Jen has tagged us on?
So not much to add to that. You guys did a good job, I think. And also we have to remember if we rewind back a few days when we were talking a bit about the stages of neuroplastic healing, we also have to remember stage 1, which is about your basic housekeeping. So that may mean, yes, turning your Wi-Fi off when you don't need it. It may mean bringing in elements of grounding practices, like getting your bare feet on the ground morning and night so you can discharge some electron buildup. Very important practice, grounding. There's basic things we can do for ourselves. There's also helpers in the, I am admittedly coming from 13 years in the counterculture hippie world, but there are various stones that can be helpful with grounding, shungite, obsidian. There's various resources we can get that are practical that can help mitigate some of these things. So there's basic level stuff that you can do, diet. We don't get a ton into that, but ensuring you're not eating lots of toxic stuff, remembering the foundational principles of just basic housekeeping kind of ties into this as well. There's one here. Did we get the one about the IFS?
No.
Family system? Yeah. So I have ME. I'm currently very ill, huge relapse because of stress and the virus and lots of trauma. Body feels broken. I've been doing internally family systems therapy. I have a lot of developmental trauma. Dad was frightened. Mom was frightened. Can I do SBSM from my bed? I'm not used to being bed bound, but here I am. So yes, absolutely. We've had many participants in this same situation who literally do start the program from bed and now are getting out and walking. I think we just got a letter about this specifically the other day. This happens a lot where people start the work just from their bed because that's all they can do. And yes, over time, they get better. Absolutely. It's interesting you bring up IFS too. That's an interesting modality. We don't bring it in, we're not trained in that, but I've had many clients who have done that work, and the somatic work lends itself to IFS very well, because then it's not just, oh, I'm feeling this part. It's like, what's the somatic experience of this part? What is the sensations of this part? What are the emotions of this part? Can I feel in my body where this part lives? So there's ways that this work can tie into that work that you're already doing as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sound like this is the one program, because it's not. There are other things out there, but I do want to remind everyone that SmartBody SmartMind isn't just one thing. It is blending the work of Peter Levine, somatic experiencing, the work of Kathy Kane and Stephen Terrell around somatic practice and resilience and regulation, specifically to working with early trauma, developmental trauma. And we really didn't speak about this much today, but it's bringing in the work of Dr. Moshe Feldenkrais. I like to call it Feldenkraisian learning. And it's really this amazing blend of all these elements from pioneers in this healing somatic neuroplasticity mind body environment world. And so there is something interesting when we go back to the roots of what did our bodies need when we were young? What are the capacities that we don't have? Can we sense ourselves? Can we sense the environment? So much of just I say those air quotes, just doing that puts a lot of stuff in good alignment. So again, not to say that you might not work with an IFS practitioner or an SE practitioner, or, you know, an energy worker or a psychic or a body worker or a shaman or a priest, you know, to have a talk about things. But man, when you can have this biology on board, all those other things just fall into place in a much, much easier way.
Yeah.
Jen flagged one, so I'm going to read it. Maybe this will be one of our final ones. Back to basics. If you have always run away from feeling very difficult things, this is a question from Elaine. If you have always run away from feeling difficult things and are also very worried about feelings coming up during body scans, including disgust and the memories associated with that, is there any reassurance in relation to SBSM that this will not happen until you are ready? I guess I can't imagine feeling safe doing the practice at this point. I'll say something and then Seth will say something and then maybe Janice will wrap her up here. But yeah, we might feel things that we're not ready for. But what Seth actually threw out a word that some of you might not know: neuroplastic healing sequencing. So this is the way in which we've really formulated the way the lessons build over the 12 weeks. We're not asking you to connect to some of the bigger things like healthy aggression. I'm not talking about toxic shame at the beginning. We're talking about resources. We're talking about orienting. We're talking about feeling impulse. So we're really wanting to layer the capacity building so that when some of these more intense things come up, our pool, our capacity is bigger to be with them. Now, that being said, sometimes things will pop up and be like, hey, I want you to feel me today. And that's where some of the basics actually will help. And also knowing, this is something coming up. This is a memory. This is intense. And I think maybe right now I need to resource to something. I need to disconnect from my body in a way that is intentional. I got to go watch a funny movie, right? I got to make myself some pasta. You know, I need to go and shake it out or listen to something on, you know, my music that will help me. So we teach you at the beginning that it's okay to resource and move out of the body sensations that are intense. This is what pendulation might do. It's a kind of a keyword that Peter Levine brought in. We're moving our attention somewhere else. We're shifting our focus. Doesn't mean that that wasn't important to feel, but not ready yet. Not ready yet to do that. Anything else to add there?
Janice?
Well, I would just add that intentionally, of course, whoever shared this question, from where you're at right now, maybe diving into the body seems like not a really good idea. And as Irene was saying, that's not what we do. We don't go to the worst thing that can happen, or the place that feels terrible, or this emotion that feels like it's just going to take me under. We build very slowly, a little bit at a time. And, you know, there's a phrase that goes like this. It's like, the trouble with trauma therapy is the focus on the trauma. My attention's on the trauma, I'm going to feel more trauma. The challenge, you know, the difficulty, the problem with nervous system dysregulation work is the focus on the dysregulation. We're actually focusing on building regulation. We're focusing on noticing what feels a little better, what resources me to feel more engaged and connected with myself and my partner or my friend. And so I would say that what you're sharing is completely normal and to be expected. And we don't go diving into the deep end of the pool.
Yeah. And it's a very normal place to be. And learning how that you can make little dips. I mean, part of the orientation practice at the very beginning is about learning how to move your attention back and forth, such that you're really just connecting to the external environment, perhaps, right? And maybe even you're making it really pleasant. You're picking one thing that's just really easy to look at and feels good to look at. And then maybe you check in with, like, what's it like to feel somatically that sense of goodness, of, oh, I enjoy this. That is building capacity to notice your internal experience. It's not about going straight to the Shark Tank, right? It's about, oh, this is good. I can notice this. And I can notice that internally, And then I can stop noticing internally. Like Janice said, I can bring my attention out. I don't have to stay inside. So it is very, and this all also comes back to your pace. I mean, you'll hear us say, if you join the program, you'll hear us say ad nauseum, it's about finding your own pace. Just discovering what that is what people may do during the first live session, is they may take those 12 weeks to figure out, this is my pace that is right for me. Right? And especially with early developmental trauma, it may be a lot slower than the suggested curriculum outline. And the only reason we put that in there is because a lot of people also like suggested outlines. That's soothing for some people, especially with a trauma history, to have it all organized, and there it is. And I like this, I can stick to my plan. Some people benefit from that. Other people benefit from ditching that entirely, which we wholeheartedly encourage you to do, and discover, I just want to focus on this one thing this week. So it's there, like we said, the program's there for you, the material's there for you to learn how to engage with in the way that best suits your unique system.
Okay, I just found the question that we will end with today, because I know we could keep going for 5 hours, because we love this work, and it's fun to hang with you, Janice. We got to do this more often.
Yeah.
So this is from Cyan or Sean, right? So for those with a very high ACE score, is it best to go for SmartBody SmartMind rather than the 21-day nervous system tune-up? In my opinion, yes. And that's the opinion of someone who created these courses. The reason why, if you are able to commit, resource-wise, financially to SmartBody SmartMind now, is it is laid out in a much more strategic, not that the 21 days isn't, but we have got more about resource building. We have more about working with the body components. We get into the layers of the body, the areas of the body that contain emotion and the traumas, right? The joints, the diaphragms. We work with healthy aggression. We're teaching you about toxic shame versus healthy shame. Seth is doing live calls. I am doing live calls. So there's just a lot more to SmartBody SmartMind, obviously, because it is 12 weeks and it is a higher price point. That being said, the 21 days is still a wonderful place to start if you can't join SBSM this round. There still is moderation support within that group. Jen's in there moderating with Mara and Carrie, two of our other colleagues. And SBSM gets into working with the stress organs, the gut, the brainstem, the area around the heart called the mediastinum, the kidney adrenals, which are like, where our stress responses come out of, the adrenaline, the cortisol. There is more movement, there's more breath guidance as well. So there's just a lot more within SmartBody SmartMind, and it was the first program that I developed. And then we developed the 21-day nervous system tune-up so that when we weren't in live session for SmartBody SmartMind, someone could start the work and begin it in that moment. If you do become an SBSM member, the 21-day nervous system tune-up is included within that tuition fee. And if maybe you start with the 21 days, when you're ready to do SmartBody SmartMind, we take the cost of the 21 days off of the SBSM tuition. So they kind of balance each other out in a really interesting way. Often people will ask, is this the only time you're going to run registration? I don't know. So we're not sure if we run again in the fall. The last 4 years, we've run it once a year, with the exception of last year, we ran it twice. So it's hard for me to know how that will play out this year. So if you are feeling the desire and the impulse, do read through the registration and information page. Take your time. There's a whole page of FAQ questions if you want more information. We start next Thursday. That's when we start with our orientation call, the 23rd of Feb, and registration is open until this Tuesday. That's all, folks. Thank you so much, Janice and Seth and Jen and Bonnie. I hope this was useful for everyone here listening live and on the recording. Lots of good info and teaching.
Thank you all for being here. And thank you, yes, Janice, Jen, Bonnie, Irene. Yep. Go team.
Yeah, go team. Thanks, everybody. It
Go
was
team.
great.
Bye,
Yeah.
everyone.
Ciao.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Jen.